Let's welcome in a very, very special guest now. Jeremy Zook, Director at Sovereign Rating, Fitch Ratings, is now with us. Jeremy, thanks so much for taking our time for us. Could you just first start by analyzing the current macros? How is India positioned versus the rest of the world? What are the parameters that will lead to deterioration in fiscal outlook, if any?
Yes, thank you for having me, first of all. So I think our view is that India, when we did our forecasts back in March, we had forecast a 12.8% rebound for India. So India was certainly well positioned compared to most other economies in the world for a very, very robust recovery from the pandemic shock last year. Of course, what we're seeing now with the very worrying public health emergency across India is a very rapidly changing situation and a situation that we think will add to some headwinds to our 12.8% growth forecast. Of course, as we see, restrictions are being rolled out across a number of states. And virus cases do continue to increase. And so we're keeping quite a close eye on a number of indicators, looking at mobility indicators in particular, and just the level of restrictions across the economy to assess what sort of impact we can expect from this new wave of the virus. And so certainly I think we will be revising down our growth forecast based on the recent surge in cases. It's just a question of, how much of a headwind does this pose to the economy? What we've seen around the world is that second waves usually don't have as severe of an impact as the first wave did last year. And secondly, we do expect India to not go back to a widespread national lockdown, a very severe lockdown. We expect lockdowns to be localized and less stringent than they were last year. And so that does perhaps mitigate some of the risk, but certainly we're seeing downsides to the near-term macro outlook.
So, right, I can understand what you're saying is, something that will have an impact on the growth, and it may not be as severe as what you've seen earlier. But what is the sense that you get? Do you think the sharp rise in cases is something which definitely posed a risk? Till now, the belief or market and economists are believing that, it will have a sharp recovery as the virus is not unknown to India and to the world, and plus there is a vaccination drive, but that continues to be the big risk?
That this near-term surge in cases, it does postpone India's recovery, but it doesn't derail the recovery in our view. I think what we're likely to see is that it will take a little bit longer now for India's economy to come out of this recent surge in cases, but we still expect India to return to a relatively strong pace of growth. I think what we saw after the first wave last year was quite a robust rebound in growth in India. And we do expect that to materialize again once this second wave subsides. But certainly, I think, at least in the very near term, we're likely to see some more headwinds to growth. Over the medium term, I think, India's growth prospects are still quite strong. And that's something that we from the rating side see as a fundamental rating driver for India, just the strong rates of growth that we expect to persist over the medium term.
Hi, Jeremy. This is Mubina as well joining in. That was actually going to be my next question, that after the first wave and, as the country slowly started unlocking, we saw this tremendous uptick in economic activity in the country. The second half of this fiscal was really marked by a lot of improvement in the frequent macroeconomic indicators, and that we expect this perhaps to happen once again once this wave passes us. And I really hope that it happens sooner rather than later. But for FY22, what do you think is the best case scenario? I mean, we are seeing many agencies downgrade their GDP estimates for the country for FY22, unsurprisingly. What's the best case scenario which would perhaps cause you to at least maintain that growth outlook?
We need to see quite a strong rebound. I think, we would likely still downgrade our growth outlook just because of the sequential pace of quarterly on quarter growth that we're likely to see going forward. But we do, I should mention, have India's economy slowing to 5.8% growth in fiscal year 23. And so if growth is a little on the weaker side from our current forecasts in fiscal year 22, I think just technically that would lead to a bit of a stronger growth number for FY23. So again, I think this just really reflects our view that it's really a postponement of India's recovery from the coronavirus, but not a derailment of it in terms of longer term negative impacts on India's medium term potential growth.
Okay. So a postponement rather than a derailment of the economic recovery in the country. How swift do you expect it to be? I mean, we talk about a V-shaped, U-shaped, a K-shaped as well. Do you see certain segments contributing more to this recovery than the others? Which ones do you see recovering the fastest?
I think what we're seeing, and this is generally the case in many countries in the world, is a bit of a K-shaped recovery. So while some sectors are doing quite well emerging from the pandemic, certain sectors, where social distancing restrictions are still a constraint, such as face-to-face retail and things of that nature, there's perhaps a little more pressure in terms of the economic recovery. I think, from a ratings perspective, we are, of course, quite focused on this near-term impact for the growth outlook and the impact that this has on public finances in particular. But from our view, I think, the longer term, the medium term outlook is a bit more important for our ratings assessment. And so what we're trying to figure out is, how much of an impact this pandemic shock and now this second wave will have on India's ability to recover over the medium term and return to some of those high growth rates. And so some of the scarring impacts, I think, will most likely come through from the financial sector. And India's financial sector was in a relatively weak position coming into the pandemic. I think our view is that the situation there is perhaps facing a little more challenging environment with the second wave in terms of banks' asset quality. And so I think, perhaps that could be a biggest constraint on medium-term growth, which, as I mentioned, is probably more important from our ratings perspective than just the near-term hit to growth that we're seeing from this second wave.
Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today on the show and sharing with us your outlook on how this wave is going to impact India. We expect a K-shaped, Fitch expects a K-shaped recovery, and more importantly, it's just a delay or a postponement in that recovery and not a complete, derailment.